to understand how way it is. It's not a secret anymore, 'cause we've been through that before. From tonight, I know that you're the only one. I've been confused and in the dark. Now I understand. Yeah. Why I don't argue about it, but everything I know I won't let my guard down for anyone. Doing all the time, blowing out my mind. Just like a star across my sky, just like an angel off the page. You have appeared to my life. Feel like I'll never be the same. Just like a song in my heart, just like oil on my head.
Welcome to our Bronx Alumni and Beta Psi Sigma Chapters event. We are delighted you chose to be with us today. We want you to have a wonderful experience. Please be assured your safety as well as your enjoyment of the event is our utmost concern. Please take a moment, look around, and identify the nearest two exits, whether in a virtual setting or at your home or physically in some form of venue. We must always be ready. So please identify two exits in your current location. In the event it is necessary to evacuate quickly and orderly in case of an emergency. Also, during this COVID-19 pandemic, even if you are vaccinated, please remember to wear your mask, wash your hands, and always walk and stand 6 feet apart from others. Please enjoy the event and continue to be safe. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Derek Hammett. I'm the president of Beta Psi Sigma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. And the chapter was established in 1952 in Westchester County. The fraternity Phi Beta Sigma was founded on the campus of Howard University in 1914 as a brotherhood of conscious men. Their goal was to serve the communities through social justice as well as civil rights. This tradition has continued with some of our prominent chapter brothers of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, such as James Weldon Johnson, Harry Belafonte, Congressman John Lewis, who encouraged us to get in good trouble through social action in our communities. On the behalf of the Brothers of Beta Psi Sigma chapter, we would like to thank the sorors of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Bronx Alumni Chapter for partnering with us this evening for this panel discussion, which is very dear and near to me as a Bronx resident. Now, I would like to introduce our timekeeper, Sister Regina Bowman, and our moderators for this evening's panel, Sora Janelle Boyd and Brother Furman Espinosa from Beta Psi Sigma chapter.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Janelle Boyd, and I am the chair of the Social Action Committee for the Bronx Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And joining me tonight is Furman Espinosa. Want to introduce yourself? You're muted.
Of course, I'm on mute. I do that all the time. My apologies, Janelle. I want to thank you this evening for the introduction, and it's indeed a pleasure for me to join you as well as our featured guests and as well as the sorors of Delta Sigma Theta, the Brothers of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, Beta Psi Sigma Chapter, and of course, the members of our general audience.
So tonight, joining us for our panel, we have and welcome Council Member Kevin C. Riley of Bronx District 12 and Nick Smith, the first Deputy Public Advocate, the Office of the Public Advocate for Jamani Williams. So we thank you to our panelists for joining us this evening, and I will turn it back over to Furman to discuss the purpose of our forum.
Thank you again, Janelle, and good evening to everyone. When it comes to economic prosperity and the ubiquitous topic of diversity and inclusion, it has been often said that a rising tide lifts all boats. And it's precisely this catchphrase or expression which will frame the theme of tonight's conversation. Is there a housing paradox with our featured guests? At practically every turn, and especially in the last 10 years, one can easily bear witness to the presence of new construction throughout the borough, with many being strikingly visible in their size, appearance, location, and the branding of luxury living often associated with said projects. New construction is by no means limited to the advent of residential structures. Commercial construction and the growing influx of corporations carving their space within are also factored into this equation. On the surface, the proliferation of these buildings is almost always viewed as a strong indicator of economic growth, which is fueled by a combination of private investments and partnership with local municipalities and economic development agencies, whose mission is to ensure communities and their residents both benefit short and long term. Unfortunately, we have seen this very scenario play out on many stages, and the eventual outcomes differ significantly from the opportunities these initiatives were intended to create, especially for those with deep generational roots and whose economic realities pose challenges that seriously limit their options. Our goal tonight is to have an interactive, real, and insightful conversation during which we will ask very poignant and direct questions for which there may be no perfect answers, but through which we hope our audience can be enlightened for themselves or their loved ones. With all of that as a backdrop, let's dive into tonight's program, shall we? I would like to turn the program back over to you, Janelle.
So first, we have a very brief survey for the audience. Tech team, if you can put up the first question. Our first question is true or false? 40% of my monthly gross income is the recommended amount to pay for my monthly rental fees. True or false? And moving on to our second question, tech team. Our second question, true or false? The per capita income in the Bronx is a little over $30,000. True or false? Thank you, tech team. And moving on to our third question. True or false? A person earning $60,000 per year can afford to pay $2,500 a month in rent or mortgage expenses. And again, that is true or false. And that is our final question for this evening. So the questions that we asked the audience to ask today were what we perceive to be some housing myths. So now we're going to go through the facts and the answers to those questions. So for question number 1, which was 40% of my monthly gross income is the recommended amount to pay for my monthly rental fees. If you answered false, that is correct. According to the New York Times, bank institutions and other lending institutions, 30% is generally accepted as a percentage of your gross monthly income to pay monthly rental fees. For our second question, the per capita income in the Bronx is over $30,000. That would be per year. And that answer is also false. Based on the 2020 census data, the median per capita income is a little under $24,000. And the average Bronx household income is $43,726, and that is for a family of 4. The actual number is $23,862 for an individual. And again, that was according to the 2020 US Census data. And then for our last question, a person earning $60,000 per year can afford to pay $2,500 a month in rent or mortgage expenses. And that is also false. Based on the generally accepted gross monthly income, a person earning $60,000 per year should limit their monthly expensive pay to $1,500 per month. So now we will be moving right into our panel discussion. And our first question is, in your view, do we have a housing inequity concern in the Bronx? And if yes, where is it prevalent and what factors contribute most to it? And I will start with Councilmember Riley.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd, for having me here tonight. City Councilman Kevin Riley, council member in the 12th District. Apologize for the children's voices in the back. I'm on daddy duty tonight. I'm also the chair of Zoning and Franchise, which is a subcommittee under the Land Use Division. And of course, there is inequities within the Bronx when you think about housing, but that has been for years. The Bronx hasn't really been invested in for years when you think about infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. We're just getting to the Bruckner, rezoning and the Bruckner Boulevard highway. We're just doing certain projects in the Bronx. There's a limited housing supply within the Bronx, and it's because of the Bronx is a real dense population, really limited to land availability, and historically we have housing stock that has been really aged out. So that makes it even more of a challenge for individuals to invest within the Bronx. And then you have a lot of communities in the Bronx that are taking a lot of the burden. The South Bronx in particular, you have Mount Haven, you have Hunts Point, you have a lot of areas in the South Bronx that are being included with shelters, and also have a lot of affordable housing that are being built down there. So there's a lot of disinvestments within communities within the Bronx. So there's a lot of inequities within communities in the Bronx.
Thank you. Our second question is, we shared the per capita median income of a Bronx resident is just under $24,000. Yet the average monthly rent for a 1-bedroom, according to rent.com, is $25,500 per month. Are we stating the obvious by asking if there's an affordability issue, or are we taking a very narrow view that inadvertently dismisses other important considerations? Mr. Smith, would you like to weigh in?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. It's great to be with you all and good to see you, council member. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're missing any big considerations. I think the housing crisis, the part and parcel of it is that developers are building units that are frankly unaffordable. And even under the bracket of affordable housing, it's just frankly not affordable. And I guess that's really stating the obvious. I think the question really is not, is this the problem? I think we all know it is. I live right across the bridge in Harlem, and it's the same situation here. In fact, in my neighborhood, in the last, I think 10 years, we've lost 10,000 Black Harlemites, and we've gained 20,000 white residents of higher income. So when we talk about Bronx, that is the exact same risk. The risk of developers coming in, as the councilmember mentioned, certain neighborhoods in the Bronx, and building these units that are not affordable. So I think the question is, what can government do about it, particularly state government and city government?
Thank you. So you answered a little bit of our next question, but our next question I will pose to both of you. So does the construction of new developments mask growing concerns with respect to the housing equity in the Bronx?
I say one of the concerns I see as the chair of zoning and franchises is the fact that a lot of communities don't feel like they're part of the process. And that's why even with the speaker, and when we introduced the framework for fair housing in city council, we just introduced that last week. That was one of the components that I really, really love, because the fact that we're going to have a lot of, community inputs, because sometimes when I remember there was a project in my colleague in Brooklyn's district, which was on Atlantic Avenue, but Atlantic Avenue really needs to be focused on transportation because there has been a lot of accidents. So just to make it more dense around in the area, because when you're building buildings, you're adding more people to that area. So you have to be conscious of the schools in the community, open space in the community, where's in there supermarket in the community. These are factors that you want to pay attention to. So a lot of times when people see buildings grow up, and sometimes the buildings could be as a right, where the developer doesn't have to go through the process of doing the ULURP process, where they have to go through the community board, they have to go through the borough president, they have to go through city council. That gives the community more opportunity to have a say so. But if it's an as a right development, and it could be underutilized land, and there's a lot of underutilized land within the Bronx for decades. So a developer could own that land. I'm seeing a lot of people selling land especially during the pandemic. And you're seeing a lot of people just building things on the land. And some people are even fear of maybe they're building buildings that they're going to turn into shelters instead of affordable housing. So these are the concerns that a lot of people in the Bronx are going through. And I'll kick it over to our Deputy Public Advocate. Nice to see you, Deputy Public Advocate, as well.
You too, Councilmember, always. I second everything the councilmember said. And yeah, I think we're masking all those concerns. And I might get a little bit redundant, and I sorry, not sorry, but these are some of the real solutions. So when it comes to building, one way that developers run up in our neighborhoods, including parts of the Bronx, and put up these towers is getting federal, our taxpayer dollars. So how it works here, and the CM was getting at it, they file a ULURP application with the council, get into negotiations, and they figure out what level of subsidy can I get from the mayor's office in particular to put up that tower. Federally, there's something called area median income, which is AMI. And so when that money comes down to the state and down to the city, there are certain strings attached. And the strings are, if you want this subsidy, you've got to build at certain AMIs. And typically what happens is developers are building units that they call affordable, but that are not. So we've got to get actually at the federal level for them to allow New York to have a localized AMI, because it's way too high relative to the income that Bronx residents and even most New Yorkers make. So it's a matter of looking at those tools to force downward pressure on rents and downward pressure on all the other costs related to housing in the Bronx and in the city.
Thank you. Thank you both for your responses. And now I will turn it over to my co-host, Furman Espinosa, for our second set of questions.
Thank you, Janelle. And I'd like to certainly piggyback a little bit into what Deputy Advocate Smith had talked about when he mentioned where he lives in relationship to Harlem and the Bronx, and the number of white residents that have actually moved from one place into the area. I think you mentioned the number was around 20,000. So as we get into the topic of gentrification, I want to use that as a backdrop or to provide some context into the next set of questions. When the term gentrification is bandied about, it can trigger a host of opposing reactions or opinions, depending on who you ask. What is your perspective on gentrification? And before you answer that, is it an all or nothing proposition? And how can communities, government, and the private sector partner effectively to change what is a frequently pessimistic view?
When you think of gentrification, I met my wife in 2008. She's from Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy. So going over to her family's house, I looked at that community for a decade, I would like to say. I've seen that community transition from the community it was to the community now. There's upgrades to the community where you have better supermarkets, you have open space, you have nicer looking buildings, but the people in the community did not have a say so. If you remember in 2008, there was a recession. So there was a lot of things that happened during 2008 where people were priced out of their neighborhood and people came into the neighborhood. So when we think of gentrification, I kind of have a different feeling towards it. I think what we're talking about now is colonization, when people actually come in your community and kind of take over. I think that's something we've been seeing for a good chunk of time within the last decade. And I think the best way to improve that is, and I'm trying to do that in my district right now, where the community sees a place that is an eyesore to them, but they see potential. So what I'm trying to do now is, have the community be more proactive, because a lot of communities, I'm trying to transition them into like the community board, because the community board always has a land use committee. So the community board is pretty much the city council representatives for that community. So the same way we have oversight over city agencies, I know my community boards operate like that. They have a community for sanitation, committee for land use, committee for youth services. So when I'm trying to get people to focus more and participate in the community board, and then get the community board to participate with me by indicating where in areas in the community that there's potential that you can build, and also areas that you can help improve. Then also explaining what type of time we are in, because a terminology you hear a lot is NIMBY, not in my backyard. The issue with NIMBY is you have a specific amount of people who've lived in a neighborhood for decades, and they don't want to see bike lanes, but they don't understand that more people are converting to public transportation and riding bikes more. Or more people, we understand that we have to fix it. New York City is a dense place where we want to make the air and the emission lower, where we want people to, ride bikes or use public transportation. So you have to explain that in the time that we're in right now. So I think I will always, in order to combat and fight back against gentrification, which I like to call colonization, I think it's important for communities to indicate what they want to see in their community, whether that's affordable housing, affordable senior housing. I'm really big on home ownership, because I want families, especially communities of color, able to pass housing down and shelter down 2 generations of family, because that is the number one concern we all have, is to have shelter and food. So I want our people to have home ownership. So I don't want to dig too deep on affordable housing. I think as New York City, we spend a lot of time with affordable housing and don't talk a lot more about home ownership, especially for communities of color. So with gentrification, I just believe that the community needs to participate more, and that's what we're trying to do, especially in District 12. I know I was a mouthful. Hopefully I answered your question.
No, you did, Councilman Riley. Public Advocate Smith, did you want to chime in on that?
Sure, absolutely. So when you said the word that popped up into my head was displacement. We've seen all over the city, including in the Bronx, patterns of displacement, not just on racial lines, but income lines and other demographic lines. And I'll tell you, one of the things that the Public Advocate did in terms of working with, Councilman Riley and other members was pass something called a racial impact study. which for the first time in the city's history requires developers to put on paper, when you go to the city council and you meet with Councilmember Riley and the speaker and other folks, and you put the application in, you've got to tell us with that proposal for, it could be 300 units at 160 AMI, which is ridiculous, by the way, because that's just way above, affordable. But tell us, what is the actual impact on race and families in the particular proposed zone? And so there was a lot of pushback from developers and that community, but we had to get it done. Now, folks may say, well, why don't we need a study to tell us what we already know? We know displacement is happening. We know what's happening. Why the study? For the first time, we're requiring developers to put it on paper so that when Councilmember Riley goes to zoning and franchises, or other members go to land use, the larger committee, they can see in the application the proposed number of units, whether there's I know we're going to get into it, MIH, mandatory inclusionary housing, what MIH option, and also if it's built, what happens in terms of the current existing population, which is racial and other demographics. So we're proud of that work, and we know there's a lot more to be done. But displacement is just a huge problem, not only in the Bronx and the city, but across the country. So again, the question is, what can government do to stem the tide? And it's not an easy, there aren't easy answers, but we can make strides forward if we work together and pull different levers. And one of them actually includes, and we're going to get to it, MIH. And I'm happy to talk about that later on.
Great, thank you both for those responses. And we certainly will tackle some of the other topics around solutions a little bit later in the program. But let me finish on this gentrification question. According to Street Easy, there were 2 condominiums in the Hunts Point area that sold for over $1.1 million each in 2022. Some would view those transactions and conclude the Bronx is up and coming, while others may interpret the same with a sense of long-term doom, i.e., is the Bronx being sold out? Is either side correct, and what are the merits depending on which side you sit on? I'll open that question to both of you.
I wouldn't say either side is incorrect, to be honest. You have one side. I've lived on my block for over 30 something years, 32 years, I believe now. So I've seen my mother and a lot of other people who purchase homes on this block buy homes for a very low price at that time, but their houses tripled the amount that they can have now. So my mother has me, my brother, and my sister, so she's able to have that equity to give her children. Now, when you look at someone new who wants to purchase a home now within your same community, they can't pay $1 million to live in the same community where your mother bought that house for probably $200,000 or $250,000. So that makes it really challenging. And as you see now, I just had a meeting today with the Bronx Neighborhood Housing Services. They're saying people in our communities, especially in the 12th district, they're getting approved for loans between $250,000 to $400,000. Now, when you're trying to purchase a home within my district right now, the lowest home within my community right now is about $700,000. And that's not giving you the multifamily where you could get other sources of income by having tenants. It's not giving you anything but that one family you're getting for $700,000. So is the Bronx up and coming? It depends on what side you look at it. If you have property within the Bronx, like a lot of, people who migrated here in the late 80s, who purchased homes here, which I have a lot in my specific district, then yeah, you're looking at the Bronx as being an up and come up. I've seen a lot of my neighbors sell homes, pass it off to their children, and have equity to start businesses and things of that nature. But when you're looking at my peers, people that live and want to stay in the Bronx and can't afford to live here, then no, you're being priced out. $1.1 million to buy a home in Hunts Point is challenging, especially when the community hasn't been invested in yet. So you're paying a lot of money and your schools are still failing. Your parks are run down. You don't have social services. You don't have community centers. You barely have open spaces. We're just getting to that right now. So to pay that much money right now is a challenge. So it depends on what side you're looking at, how we answer that.
Understood. Public Advocate Smith?
Yeah. What I would say is, I have to agree again with the council members' framing of it. I would even look at, the first word I saw in that framework was condo. Well, condos typically require a higher down payment than a 1 or 2 family home. So if you're talking about half of that number at $500 and some odd $1,000, your down payment is going to be in the $50,000, $60,000, $65,000 range for a down payment for that condo. And so while there are some programs that attempt at the city level specifically to assist with down payments, particularly if you're low income, that is very much out of reach. And you can look at parts of the Bronx like the waterfront, where there's some new developments either in progress or slated to be built. Third at Bankside, the Arches, and one at the Third Avenue Bridge. These are, I believe, mostly condos, probably close to that number or a little bit less, which quite frankly is, I know, unreachable considering the average income for Bronx residents. So I think it is about figuring out how can we have a downward pressure on those costs. And that's very challenging when you have a free market structure where developers and landlords want to maximize their profits. So it's almost a catch-22 situation that we have to focus on.
Understood. I will certainly look to address that again, just in a few minutes from now. I'd like to turn the program over back to Janelle for the next section in our questions bank.
Thank you. So our next question is going to be related to affordable housing. And as you discussed, Deputy Advocate Smith, we do have a question regarding the mandatory inclusionary housing. So I'll start with that question. In 2021, the city's Office of the Public Advocate issued a report which suggested that the city should evaluate income target mechanisms, with one of them being mandatory inclusionary housing. Enlighten us on what these are intended to accomplish and what metrics are used to determine if they have met or exceeded expectations.
Thank you for referencing that report. So we did a report on what's called MIH. And this is actually one of the, I think, policy achievements of the previous mayor, even though, after that, some things were just kind of screwed up. But for the first time in the city's history, developers were required to include X number of quote unquote affordable units when they come before Councilmember Riley and the city council mandatorily. And so that did make, I would say, a certain level of progress in the sense that when the developer comes for the council, they've got 3 options to choose from. One of them is basically a market option, option 3, which is not ideal. But the others dictate if you're going to build those units, you got to go way down to 30 and 40% of the area median income to cut a deal with the council. So that was, I think, an achievement. But developers have ways of kind of getting around that, or even choosing option 3, which is essentially market. So what we're saying is we need to tweak the MIH program to, frankly, get rid of that market option and dig as deep as we can as low as we can on the AMIs. And again, that's going to require, I think, a combination of federal, state, and local support. But I think we can get it done. It's a hard conversation, but I think it just has to happen.
Councilmember Riley, I don't know if you had anything to add. I know that question was kind of specific to their report.
No, Deputy Public Advocate really said it best. Is an option that developers do utilize so they can get more support from a city council member. We have something in the council called member deference. I think that's important for this conversation as well. Member deference is usually when a developer wants to build within a community, and let's say the community isn't for it and the developer still wants to pursue it. The council member will probably, if the community is not for it, be against it as well. And then that's what we'll call a member deference. There are times where the council will go against member deference. If the project is a project that is going to be very beneficial to the totality of New York City. An example of this could be the Blood Center zoning project that happened with the previous city council body. But it's very rare that the council goes against member deference, which is extremely important. That's why I know myself as the chair, I always say, what is the community's input? Because I know as elected members, we usually always want to listen to how our community views a specific project. But it's also important that as a member, we also include our community in it, because we are in a housing crisis right now. We do definitely have to address the housing crisis. The only issue is, and I think that's what we're trying to overcome right now, is making sure that we're approaching this holistically. AMIs, vouchers, the voucher issues that we have within the city, the lack of investing in communities. I talked about transportation, streets, schools. These are a lot of approaches that we have to utilize now.
Thank you. So our next question. Some owners have turned their buildings into city shelters because it's generally more profitable with guaranteed rent rolls. Does this practice mitigate or worsen housing equity challenges?
I believe it worsens it. If you're going in the community strictly building projects and then turning them into shelters instead of actually turning them into affordable housing, I think that doesn't help us get people out of this housing crisis. So I'm definitely opposed to anybody who's trying to go in the community just to build because they think that they could get guaranteed money because they're building shelters and they're going to get subsidies from the city. But if you're going in communities and you truly want to build a community, you're investing in the community as well. So you're a part of that community. So I think it's very important that if you're going to go in the community, you have good faith, you work with the members in that community, and you try to figure out what they need. A lot of communities will work with you if you actually go to them when you know it's most needed.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can weigh in. I was going to pass it to you.
Okay, cool. Agreed again. And the way Public Advocate Williams frames it is, you can make money, you just can't make all the money. And housing is a human need and a right. And so we have to balance those competing interests with the needs of New Yorkers again. Turning them over to shelters and grabbing all these big checks, which are, yes, guaranteed money from the city, that's taxpayer dollars, doesn't serve the need to build permanent affordable housing.
Thank you. So due to time constraints, we're gonna move on to our next section, which is the solutions. And that is going to be presented by my co-host, Herman Espinosa.
So thank you again, Janelle, and I want to thank Councilman Riley and Deputy Advocate Smith for your candid responses to our questions. Our intent was to make sure that we were not interrogational in any way, but yet we didn't want to shy away from topics that have sparked heated debates and oftentimes caused great emotional angst for so many in the community. Before we re-engage our audience with their questions, I'd like for each of you to kind of share your insights on three things. And you can, I'm not going to ask them individually, but you both mentioned solutions. You both mentioned partnerships. Councilman Riley really talked about how do we bring communities together? How do we make sure that there's an accountability and a trust factor from the communities themselves when it comes to these partnerships that are created between public and private enterprise? So from a solutions perspective, we'd love to hear your insights on improving housing affordability for renters, facilitating more home ownership. Councilman Riley, you talked about that earlier. And what are some of the individual and collective forms of ownership that perhaps we should be mindful about for those who might be interested in someday, whether near or long-term, owning their own property?
Amazing question. I think some solutions that we're trying to do as a city council right now, the fair housing framework legislation that we introduced last week, which will increase the community involvement, increase low income affordable housing production, create a needs assessment in New York City for the next 10 years with housing. So we have to figure out how much housing we're actually going to need so we're able to build this within the next 10 years. Another need is, I know I signed on to intro 0384, I believe, which is the majority leaders bill that really is focused on home ownership. That's a local law in relation to creating an office of home ownership advocate, so we can really dig deep on how we can invest in communities of color and give them the opportunity to have generational wealth. I am a big advocate and believer that home ownership is the way to get out of a housing crisis. If you're able to pass down shelter to your family or able to have some equity, to pass down, same way I have 3 beautiful children here, I want to make sure shelter is the last thing that they have to worry about. When I graduated college, moving out, getting my own place because you just come back from school, that was something on my mind. And a lot of, kids at a lot of, students who are graduating from college, a lot of people who are starting families like myself, that's what they really want to focus on. So home ownership opportunities, making sure we pass the housing framework legislation. And lastly, but not least, we really, really have to increase community participation. Understanding, for instance, my district in the Bronx, in New York City, we're like bottom 3 in producing affordable housing within the last decade. I need my community to understand that. I also need my community to work with me and indicate areas where we could build. I have a great idea now to work with faith-based institutions. A lot of our faith-based institutions are adjacent to a lot of land. We need senior housing. There's a faith-based institution within my district, St. Luke's. They're adjacent to a senior housing development. So these are ideas, these are fresh, new ideas that we can actually utilize, and we think that will work out.
And I will touch on a couple of pieces quickly. One, in terms of home ownership, we can't forget about those who currently own homes who are subject to pressure to sell and harassment. There are people who go around to our 1 and 2 family homeowners and leave flyers on the door or knock on the door every week, offering checks for $100K or $200K, which is, if they're underwater, they may be incentivized to accept that check and sell. Well, once you sell, that's changing the neighborhood, the character of our neighborhoods. And so we've passed legislation to crack down specifically on folks who go door to door trying to harass folks out of their homes. And there's an issue also of deed theft, which can also address deed theft, where seniors in particular are subject to additional harassment in the form of, they may talk to someone and they're persuaded to sign over the deed to their home to unscrupulous bad actors. So those are a couple of pieces I would talk about. And we also can't forget about public housing. In the Bronx, I think there are 200,000, no, in the city, 200,000 units of public housing overall. And they have capital needs of north of $40 billion, which we continue to push the federal government and the state government for. That's another really critical source of housing that should be available and good quality to the lowest income workers, including Bronx residents. So I don't want to forget about our public housing tenants. And then finally, Albany can pass 2 quick things, something called good cause eviction. So while there are 1 million units that are under rent regulation, there are many more units that are market rate. And when you market, you have less protections. So it's easier to evict someone in the market rate unit. So you're paying $4,000 or $5,000 plus for your unit, and it's easier for your landlord to evict you without cause. And that would better protect tenants in market rate units. And then finally, there's a bill called TOPA, a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So this is typically for multiple dwellings of 4 more units where tenants get together, fight back against horrible conditions, and Albany should pass a law to allow those residents with the right guidance to purchase those buildings and not go underwater, et cetera. So those are a few things I just want to mention in terms of solutions beyond what I've said earlier.
And certainly, I think you both presented some great insight from an accountability perspective. And I think it's clear, especially with what you just said, Deputy Advocate Smith and Councilman Riley, it's around accountability. When we're not informed, or maybe the information that's made available to us just isn't sufficient, or we don't know how to interpret how does a developer go about getting into these partnerships, how do we hold both the developer, the municipality accountable? So you talked about tax abatements and so many other advantages. Where is that accountability factor, and how do communities feel confident that elected officials like yourselves are making sure that the developers are living up to their obligation because of the many benefits that they do generate from the city and the like?
Good question. The best practice I've seen that I feel works best is really making sure, and I always encourage developers to make sure that you're engaging with communities early. I think developers, when they look at a specific project, they already have in their mind what they envision within the community, but 9 times out of 10 that developer isn't from that community, so they may not understand the makeup of the community and what that community really needs. So I always encourage developers to really engage with communities early. I know with the EULA process, the process itself takes roughly about 90 days between going through the community board, the borough president, making amendments to and changes to the plan. I know that happens frequently, but I really would say stay engaged. And as members, city council, that's the practice that we have in the city. We have control over land use that happens in New York City. So if we have to do a better job engaging our communities, especially when projects are coming down. As each project comes down, I think my specific council body is doing an amazing job doing that. I've been a part of conversations with my colleagues. I've been in meetings with them. I'm seeing them engage in their communities. They're actually being proactive. I mentioned bringing the land use team to my community, having them doing trainings, having them explain what is a R5 from what's a R6. Communities need to understand that. If communities don't understand that, a developer could come and say, hey, I'm changing your R4 to R8. Oh, what's that? Oh, nothing. We're just, adding a couple of floors, but that's a totally different, building opposed to what's there now. So being proactive and the land use team that I work with, they're amazing. They're willing to go out to council districts, and we're led by Speaker Adams, who's really, really focused on making sure that communities are really knowledgeable of what's going on.
And your baby girl agrees, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, it's a boy. It's a boy.
Oh, sorry. The baby boy agrees. He's clapping it up. Deputy Smith, if you don't mind, can you add a little bit into that? I think and we're about to wrap up before we turn it over to Janelle for audience engagement.
Sure, absolutely. 2 things. In fact, a little bit more red meat to the problem you framed. There was something called 421A, which that's gobbledygook for. There was a state subsidy going to developers in exchange for them building affordable units. And we have consistently found that in far too many cases, developers are taking that money from, frankly, taxpayers and not in return, building the affordable units. And so what that leads me to believe is both at the city and the state in particular, there are not enough literal enforcement staff to look through the files to figure out is there compliance. We don't want to wait until we have, a condition so egregious that the attorney general has to step in with criminal charges. Why don't we try to fix the problem now? So I think HPD at the city level, and of course HCR at the state, they've got to be better funded by the governor and the mayor to better ensure compliance by developers as a mainstay of increasing enforcement and compliance.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. I would like to turn the program back over to Janelle.
Thank you. So we just quickly have a few audience questions that we wanted to get to. So our first question is, how can we as people from the Bronx help with this crisis when it comes to unaffordable housing?
Go to your community board meetings. A lot of these projects are going through the community board. The community boards are given the yes, they're given the no's. If you're complaining that there hasn't been any affordable housing being built in your community, that's probably because your community board probably turned down the project. Or if you're upset that a building is going up in your community, that's probably because your community board approved the project. So if you want to be a part of the solution, please get involved in your community board. They have a community board meeting once a month. The committees usually meet once a month as well. If you can't attend the meeting, majority community boards, I think if not all, record them. So at least you'll be cognizant of what's going on in your district. But please be aware of what's going on. And the best place to start is the community board, and second, your city council member.
Yep. And I would add, if you're in a multiple dwelling, again, of 4 or more units, consider forming a tenant association to better fight for conditions in your buildings. Or if you find out that the developer is, for example, engaging in construction as harassment to evict tenants, the power of many is better than the power of one. So those TAs are very important in terms of putting pressure on developers and or landlords. And also, lastly, your voice is critically important. The councilman mentioned going to community board. I would also say when you learn of a project that you and folks around you don't like, don't be afraid to hold press conferences and rallies and speak out in the public sphere. Because when that happens, the last thing folks want is negative press. Now they may have the leverage of the dollar, but that dollar can be reduced if negative press comes in. And then, you have a governor or a mayor or their staff looking at, well, should we really be approving this level of subsidy for this particular developer? Maybe not. So your voice is also critically important, both at the board level, but also in the media.
Thank you. So our next question, two questions actually popped up in the chat really quickly about Mitchell-Lama. So I'm going to try to combine them. So our first question was, a proposal was given to former Mayor de Blasio on how to reimagine Mitchell-Lama home ownership. What are your thoughts on examining this idea with future building in the borough? And then another question came in from the audience about, do you think that the Mitchell-Lama program will eventually be eliminated?
I would have to look into that proposal from the de Blasio administration. I'm not familiar with that. Do I think the Mitchell-Lama program will eventually be terminated? Possible. It is possible. I think the state and the federal government, they're trying to reimagine it currently right now. I do think a lot of practices currently right now, especially on how certain Mitchell-Lamas accept new residents. I know even in the city, they're trying to figure out legislative ways on how you could kind of change that, especially dealing with the housing crisis. But it is possible. But I'll look into the mayor de Blasio's proposal, and I'll get back. Unless Deputy Public Advocate, if you're familiar with that.
Not in particular, but what I can say is while de Blasio was there, we saw a bunch of issues with Mitchell-Lamas, including line jumping. So when you apply, there's a certain list that you get on. When we were finding out that certain boards of Mitchell-Lamas were kind of ignoring that list and giving preference for ownership to, I guess folks they knew. So we did in fact pass a law that aimed to increase oversight over boards in terms of Mitchell-Lama. And I don't recall the exact de Blasio plan myself either, even though for full disclosure, I worked in the de Blasio admin for 3 years doing public safety and some housing stuff. I don't recall that, but I'm happy to look into it as well. You can be in touch as well on that.
Okay, thank you. And then our last question is, also given that homelessness is on the rise, what thought work is being done on increasing various city housing voucher programs to allow folks to afford to live in the Bronx in New York.
That was one of the requests that we had with the speaker's fair housing framework, was to increase low income affordable housing production and preservations of voucher utilizations. So that's something that we're actually pushing the administration. The issues with the vouchers, it's also a staffing issue. HPD, city planning, a lot of city agencies, even city council. I'm pretty sure the public advocate's office. Everyone's having kind of a staffing issues. And HPD, the buildings department, city planning, these are agencies that we desperately need to be staffed if we're going to address the housing crisis in New York City. So I think one of the first things we have to do is make sure that HPD is properly staffed in order to produce these vouchers and give these vouchers to residents who need it.
Yes, and we have to do, as a city and the state, frankly, and the feds, a better job of cracking down on source of income discrimination. So if I have a voucher, no matter what the program is, there are still too many cases where a landlord sees it and has some stereotypical assumption of, well, if they have a voucher, there's a stereotype of poverty, criminality, all those social ills, when that's frankly illegal. And even though it's illegal, a law is only good as it being enforced. And so, we both mentioned the same point about needing to have better staffing at city HPD, state ACR, and even a better attention at HUD. Last thing I'll just say about the housing piece is we just came back from DC actually and met with HUD to talk about the AMI problem, to talk about discrimination, to talk about harassment. And I hope to see some future collaboration both with HUD, the city HPD, the mayor's office, and the public advocate's office. Because again, this entire conversation is, it's a complicated one. It's very much multi-layered. For example, we talk about Mitchell Lama, that's one of several homeownership programs that dates back 30, 35, 40 some odd years that has problems. Another one are HDFCs, where tenants, were taking over distressed and or abandoned buildings, and the city just failed to make sure that there was enough financing for those tenants. So although they purchased at a very affordable amount, the city kind of abandoned them. And so whether it's Mitchell Lama, HDFC, or any other homeownership program or rental program, voucher included, we've got to make sure we do a better job of framing those programs and enforcing and supporting residents when they step up in terms of homeownership or rent.
Thank you, Councilmember Riley and Deputy Public Advocate Smith for answering those questions. And the audience questions are coming in fast and furious, but we are going to be wrapping up our discussion for tonight. So I thank you both for coming in and serving as our guest panelists for today. We found the conversation to be informative and thought-provoking, and we thank you for joining us tonight. So lastly, I just want to thank our audience, and we hope that you too found this informative and thought-provoking. And we ask that you don't keep this information to yourself. We ask that you please share what you have learned today with others and ask them to take action. Some of the solutions that you have heard tonight, we ask that you please try to put these into action moving forward. And we want to thank again, I would like to also thank my Social Action Committee. And I would also like to thank our tech team for the assistance with putting this program together. And now I will turn it over to Keenan Shoulders.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Beta Psi Sigma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, and as the social action chair, I just want to thank Councilman Riley and Nick Smith for coming out tonight. I want to thank the sisters of Delta Sigma Theta for also collaborating with us on this program, and the hosts for doing their wonderful job of hosting the program on tonight. And thank everybody for coming out, and I hope you were able to take advantage of the information that was provided. And as Janelle stated, please do not hesitate to share this with your fellow constituents, and we'll probably definitely run this back again. So thanks, everybody.